Well, good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. We welcome everyone to the Agricultural Subcommittee of Appropriations, and this is the first hearing of the 115th Congress. And today we have the U.S. Department of Agriculture Inspector General. Welcome. Glad to have you here. First and foremost, before we get started, I want to congratulate and welcome our new ranking member, Sanford Bishop from Georgia. I've had the pleasure of working with Congressman Bishop over the last several years. I think since you first came on the Appropriations Committee in 2003, is that correct? And of course, we both share a passion for the great work that the Appropriations Committee does, and in particular in what the Agricultural Subcommittee does. We both represent a district where agriculture plays a big role, a very crucial role in the livelihood of our constituents. And Mr. Bishop is well respected. He is a principal member of this committee, and he's not afraid to reach across the aisle, and I appreciate that, and to solve real issues that everyday people have out in America, whether it be in Georgia, Alabama, or whatever state it may be. And I look forward to working with him. And Mr. Bishop, welcome, and glad to have you in that role in this new Congress. Also like to welcome back all the other members of this subcommittee. We're oddly enough, or I say oddly enough, I think it's fortunately, we are one of two subcommittees that membership did not change on the majority side. Everybody was happy. We wanted to stay where they were, and that was great. On the minority side, we did welcome the addition of our new member from the 2nd District of Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan. And so we look forward to working with you. And I view the popularity of this subcommittee to be a very positive sign that the interest of this subcommittee and dealing with the real world changes. And so we want to welcome you today for this first hearing of the 115th Congress. Due to the typical delays of any new administration, we may not see the FY18 budget request for another month or so. But I'd like to share in some detail some of the themes that we'd like to set as a guideline for the subcommittee's work for FY18. Our first theme builds off on our oversight activities over the past several years. It's about evaluating and accounting for taxpayer dollars to ensure efficiency and accountability. We will continue to work to eliminate and prevent burdensome regulation, to improve agency accountability, eliminate duplicative programs and initiatives, and ensure proper staffing levels, and make investment in proven and effective programs with a demonstrated benefit to American families a top priority. The second theme is investing in rural infrastructure as a catalyst for growth. I want us to make smart investments in critical utility infrastructure such as broadband, electricity, water systems, and housing for vulnerable populations. Also assist rural businesses to create unique economic opportunities and make funding that helps to grow economic development and jobs as top priority. And the third theme is about ensuring support for farmers, ranchers, and producers. This includes providing opportunities for our constituents through access to domestic and international trade, providing credit to producers, ensuring free and fair markets, supporting science and research to promote productivity and sustainability, and guaranteeing the safety net is there for those who need it the most. Our fourth and final theme is protecting the health and safety of people, plants, and animals. We will work to protect our safe and healthy food supply, control or eradicate plants and animal pests and disease that threaten agricultural industries, ensure safety and effectiveness of human and animal drug and medical products, deliver nutrition assistance to vulnerable populations, and provide for the efficient use of funds for nutritional research and education. As for today's hearing, Ms. Fong would like to thank you for being here today and with your team. I believe this marks your 15th straight year, if my information is correct, that you have appeared before this subcommittee. That was before I came on the subcommittee, but you certainly have had a long time being on here, and you should feel right at home this morning. So needless to say, we have deeply experienced team at the office, the Inspector General, as this new administration fills its leadership positions. I look forward to discussing the ongoing challenges that are faced by the department that has arisen over the last 8 years. I also like to get your input on future problems that may arise and programs, policies, and practices that may be of concern to you. And of course, to your organization. Based upon your written testimony, it appears that the last administration failed to fix problems in a number of high priority areas such as financial management, information technology, security, and the integrity of benefits. The work you do covers so many different aspects of all American lives, from housing to electricity, business development, farm safety net, food safety, making sure people don't go hungry, things that most citizens don't really realize that goes on a day-to-day basis. Your job is incredibly important to the integrity and to the success of the department. The U.S. taxpayers should also be supportive of your work due to the risk exposure of USDA's financial activities. Most Americans would be surprised to know that USDA has over $200 billion in assets, $143 billion in annual spending, and more than $100 billion in loans. The outstanding recommendations offered by the Office of the Inspector General over the past 8 years could yield $700 million in savings. These are areas that you have identified, and it appears that no final action was taken during the previous administration. One example of the success of your work is the recent drop in improper payments for the crop insurance program. As a result of the Office of the Inspector General's annual reviews and recommendation, this rate is at a record low of 2% and has dropped for the past 2 consecutive years. Among other things, we plan to discuss issues related to your audits and investigations that range from the Farm Bill, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, information technology, accounting deficiencies, and USDA's 3-year delay in setting up the Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs mandate that was mandated in the 2014 Farm Bill. The subcommittee would also like to highlight the fact that you have once again received the outstanding recognition of your excellent work among the IG community. You received 5 awards and recognitions from the 2016 from the Council of Inspector Generals on Integrity and Efficiency, which encompasses the entirety of the IG community across the federal government. So I extend my congratulations for those achievements, as I know the full subcommittee here does as well. Before I recognize our ranking member from Georgia, Mr. Sanford Bishop, and his opening statements, I want to remind everyone that we'll try to abide as closely as possible to the 5-minute rule when we go to the Q&A, but make sure you do hit the talk button on your microphone before and after you speak. As some of you know, this we got a refurbishing of the subcommittee hearing room, and so we have some new buttons and gadgets up here, so we'll try to work through those and as we move through the hearing. So at this time, I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is my first hearing in my capacity as the new ranking member, and I want to just say thank you to you for your welcoming and for the friendship and collegiality that we've had over the years. I look forward to working with you and the members of the committee, as well as both of our staffs. I think we have started off on a very good note, and I think we will get a lot of things done for the American people. Let me just say that I also would like to welcome our new member on the minority side, Mr. Pocan. We're all excited about the challenges that we're faced with, and I want you to know that I think I can speak for all of us that the program that you have outlined in terms of oversight activities, rural infrastructure development, health and safety, and looking after our communities, particularly the rural development, has been well received on our side, and we look forward to working together on that. With that said, I'd like to welcome Ms. Fong, Mr. Harden, and Ms. Coffey. to the committee once again. It's a very distinguished panel, and judging by the many years that you have collectively served in the USDA Office of Inspector General, you obviously find your work rewarding. And of course, as the chairman indicated, the high quality of your work has been repeatedly recognized, most recently with your award, Ms. Fong, when your IG colleagues gave you an outstanding award there for your investigation into food safety issues. It led to the recall of 8.7 million pounds of meat, but it was ultimately in protection of the consuming public. And congratulations on that, and we appreciate your diligence. We're sort of in an odd situation budget-wise at the moment, as the chairman alluded to, with the 2017 bills not finished and no clear path forward in 2018. But I assure you that we always find a way to get the job done, and I hope that this year will be no exception. I have an abiding interest in your work. We've got to do everything that we can to root out fraud, abuse, mismanagement, and of course, we've got to improve efficiency and effectiveness. We've got to, and of course, you're charged with investigating criminal activity in USDA programs. In a number of cases, states and local governments actually administer programs on behalf of the federal government, but like their federal partners, their budgets are very tight, and they struggle with staffing and with training. And I fear that further restraints on our spending will make it harder and harder to administer the programs properly. And so I look forward to discussing that challenge with you, as well as the other important issues that we will face. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to going forward with our responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Ms. Fong, again, welcome, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bishop, and members of the subcommittee. We are very happy to be here today to talk about our work, and we appreciate the very warm welcome from all of you. On behalf of all of our staff, our auditors, investigators, attorneys, everyone around the country, we thank you for your support and interest and your recognition of the tough job that we do every day. Today, I'm hoping that we can build on our ongoing, very positive and constructive dialogue on a number of issues. As you mentioned, we have Gil Harden, who's head of our audit operation, and Ann Coffey, who's head of our investigations operation. They are very experienced and knowledgeable, and I know that they'll add a lot to the conversation. As many of you know, our job within OIG is to help USDA deliver its programs as effectively as possible with integrity. We do that through audits and investigations, and we make recommendations. But ultimately, it's up to the department to take the corrective actions that are necessary. You have my written statement for the record, which summarizes much of our work and our ongoing activities. And I'm just going to hit very quickly on some of the high points here, and we can, after that, get into the question and answer session. Of particular note, I want to thank the chairman and Mr. Farr, who was the ranking member at the time, for the request that you all made to us with respect to U.S. Mark and the research activities that were going on at that center. We finished a review of that this year and recommended that USDA improve its oversight of animal welfare at that site. Even though we found that many of the published media statements were without basis, we did feel that APHIS could do a better job. In the larger context of scientific integrity and research, we have some ongoing work which we will be happy to talk about during the question session. We also recently issued audits in the SNAP program with respect to a number of aspects of the SNAP program. We've done work on the administrative costs of managing that program and delivering it through the state and local governments. We've looked at the able-bodied adults without dependents provisions, And we've also looked at data analysis of potential fraud. So we've got a number of reports there that we can talk about with recommendations for improvement. And as you know, we continue to do investigations in that area. We continue to have high dollar results and convictions. In the area of farm programs, we reviewed how USDA agencies should be sharing data for program eligibility purposes. We've looked at NRCS wetland conservation activities, primarily in the prairie pothole region, and we had a number of recommendations for improvement in those areas as well. Finally, I want to note that financial management continues to be a significant challenge for the department. While USDA has made some progress, we believe that much more needs to be done, especially to attain an unmodified opinion on its financial statements, both at the consolidated level as well as at the agency level. We also need to provide sustained attention to the rising improper payment rates overall at USDA, and this will require sustained attention from leadership at the department over the next year and beyond. So in closing, I want to thank the subcommittee for your interest in our work, your continuing support over the years, our very constructive dialogue with all of your members, and we look forward to continuing that relationship. Thank you, and we're ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fong. Thanks for your testimony. And this morning we want to discuss a wide range of issues that affect USDA and get your opinion on what the major challenges as you move forward and as we all move forward. As I mentioned in my opening statements, over the last year, last 8 years, Congress has played a large role in the oversight of the department, and a lot of these challenges were never fully addressed by the previous administration. And now we have to help you and the new administration fix some critical issues. Examples that $700 million in unaddressed savings, $2.2 billion in faulty accounting estimates at the Commodity Credit Corporation, 5 consecutive years of violating improper payment laws, chronic flaws in IT security, and hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on farm program systems that have failed our farmers and our ranchers, consistently delayed and deficient financial statements. In a nutshell, I guess my question is, how can we help you? As chairman of this subcommittee for the past 4 years, many times I've grown frustrated, and I know many members of the staff have grown frustrated at the department as they roll out new initiatives that actually grabbed a lot of headlines at the times, but they neglected several basic housekeeping items. So can you tell us how you plan to raise these issues you have identified with the new secretary and the others on his leadership team, and how you may offer solutions?
Well, that's a very wide-ranging and deep question. And
You can take it the way you want to.
thank you. Well, we are looking forward to working with the new administration, the new secretary and his subcabinet when they are confirmed. And as you note, leadership at the top is critical, tone at the top is critical to bringing a sense of urgency and priority to many of the issues that we've identified. And so our intent and our plan is to start out quickly out of the box with briefing the new team coming in on the issues that we are reporting. In particular, some of the key challenges that you've raised: financial management at the department, unresolved audit recommendations, improper payments, the full litany of challenges that we have identified. Now, in terms of how all of us go forward, you're absolutely correct that many of these issues are longstanding and have deep roots. Many of the other issues that we see may be a little more ephemeral. They may be easier to address. And what I think we all have our roles to play. It's our job within the IG's office to identify these issues, to report them out to the decision makers, to bring them to your attention, to track resolution, and if resolution doesn't occur, to point that out. What we have found very helpful in the past is to have leadership at the department who views management as a critical responsibility and who's willing to work with us as we surface issues. What we have also found very helpful is, in our experience, when you, at this subcommittee level or any of the oversight committees, it has a concern about a particular issue, you have been very active in terms of raising it with us and with the secretary through hearings, through letters, through questions. And we have seen that when there is that level of interest from the oversight bodies, that tends to generate more activity in a quicker time frame. Similarly, if you ask us to do a review, we take those requests very seriously. We engage in dialogue with all of you to see what we can do to help bring some additional information and perspective to the issue. So we stand ready to do that.
Okay, let me just briefly, I've just got a few seconds here left, but one of the issues that I think boggles the mind is the 4 programs under the Food and Nutrition Services that have not complied with the improper payment laws for the past 4 years. In just a nutshell, is there ways that we can assist you in bringing attention solutions to the mistakes that keep on seeming to occur over and over again?
The improper payment laws have a whole architecture of how you approach these issues. And I think where we are now at USDA is, with respect to SNAP, there needs to be a way for FNS to move forward to identify an improper payment rate. They did not report one for FY16, and we can talk about that. With respect to other programs, and this is both the farm programs as well as FNS, there are requirements that the department move forward with corrective action plans, and they must provide those plans to Congress and OMB. And I believe the department has developed plans and has sent them forward. We can work with you to find those and provide them.
Okay, all right. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just sort of look at big picture issues, resources. As we look over your reports, there are recurring recommendations regarding the lack of management oversight, inadequate training, and so forth. The recommendations are critical to running programs properly and to safeguarding taxpayer dollars, but they also cost money. When Secretary Vilsack testified before us last year, he said that USDA employees have made significant advancement in achieving goals and that they've done it essentially with the same discretionary funding level in fiscal year 2015 and as in FY09, and with 9,354 fewer total staff years in 2015 than in 2009. During that same period, mandatory spending grew from $88 billion to $125 billion. So while the number of people at USDA who have to implement and oversee programs has declined significantly, discretionary spending is flat and mandatory spending has increased significantly. In that environment, can you tell me briefly how agencies can take on all the additional actions that you recommend in your reports? And of course, that's rhetorical, since we know that you don't control the budgets of other agencies or the states or local governments, but it's something that we've got to think about. So I'd welcome your comments on ways in which USDA and state and local governments can build capacity to properly administer and oversee the programs.
That's a difficult question. And I think all of us have seen in the federal government over the past 7 or 8 years the challenge of trying to deliver more programs and more spending with fewer resources. Certainly we in the OIG's office have experienced the same challenges. And what I can offer, and I'll ask Gil to offer some comments as well, is that we are very mindful of those challenges. We know that program managers' first priority is to deliver the program. What we try to do when we make our recommendations is to point out that in many ways, if we could figure out a more effective and efficient way to deliver those programs, in the end, it helps the program managers as well as the integrity of the program. And we're very mindful of the fact that the state and local governments do deliver many of the programs for USDA, and their budgets are also constrained. I think it became very clear to us as we did our work in the SNAP program in particular, that clarity from FNS at the national level in a number of areas as to what the regs, policies, and laws mean would make it much easier for the states and counties to do a better job of delivering programs if that clarity were there. Gil?
Yeah, I would just build on that and a little bit. It is stressing the oversight of things and going along with program delivery, and then prioritizing what is really important and what people need to focus on.
Thank you very much. Let me switch gears quickly. You mentioned in your testimony that you're looking at the issue of scientific integrity as it affects USDA scientists. The issue hits home for me because just in ARS, my state has major ARS research locations, Athens, Barron, Dawson, Griffin, and Tifton, and hundreds of scientists and staff who work there. I'm kind of troubled by the implication of the topic. Open and transparent scientific research investigations are one of the hallmarks of a prosperous agricultural society. And while I understand the investigation is in its early stages, can you share with us what agencies are included? Was it an employee viewpoint survey that prompted the assessment, or the result of an anonymous report on compromised scientific integrity to USDA Office of the Chief Scientist? And lastly, when you would expect the report to be completed?
Let me just offer some introductory comments. We started this review last year in response to a number of concerns from the media, from complainants, from Congress, that the integrity of scientific research was a significant concern. And I think in the wake of the U.S. Mark situation, people were very sensitive to these issues. So we have an audit ongoing. We're nearing completion on it, actually, that is looking at the whole situation of whether researchers feel that they can carry out their research independently and surface their findings in a way without inappropriate constraints. As part of our review, we are conducting a survey of the scientists themselves to see what their perceptions are, as well as doing our own independent assessment of the policy and its implementation.
Yeah, and to follow on from that, we're expecting that audit to come out later this spring, probably the May or June timeframe. And the survey that Phyllis referred to, we put, in terms of the agencies involved, it is ARS, APHIS, NRCS, and I'm going to forget the last one off the top of my head, Forest Service. But we put that survey out to all of the scientists, and we had a very good response rate. There was something like 60% of the scientists responded. So we got a lot of good data in terms of how they feel about how things are working.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fong, Mr. Harden, and Ms. Coffey, thank you. Welcome back to the committee. We appreciate your work to help us be better stewards of taxpayer dollars. I think it's great the chairman starts with this as being our first hearing of the year, because it allows us to get some context and some ideas as we then have an opportunity to have hearings with other cabinet officials and administrators that can be responsive to some of the concerns you've raised. Ms. Fong, in the past, you've raised a number of concerns regarding the Rural Utility Service Broadband Loan Program, and I wondered if you might discuss that a little bit again today for the committee, in terms of where we are, where we need to go, what your recommendations would be. I think by some accounts during the period after the stimulus, they spent roughly $3 billion pledging to bring broadband to 7 million homes, only 240,000 actually getting it. Is that, where are we, I guess, in terms of current status? And then what are your thoughts on redirecting the funds into a grant program that ensures funds go to underserved rural communities that are truly unserved?
Well, I think the broadband program has certainly been a topic of interest to our office over the last 10 years, I would say. We've done a series of audits, as you know, and the Recovery Act provided some additional funding, and we looked at that time. We have not been back to that program in the last 2 or 3 years. So it may be time for us to factor that into our audit planning process for FY18 to see what the risk is. As you point out, the issues that we were finding over the last several audits were whether the funds were truly going to truly underserved communities, and we saw some issues with that, as well as with the definition of rural and how that was applied. I think what I would say to you at this point is that we need to go back and factor that into our planning.
Okay. Well, I think the committee probably shares the interest of ensuring that the dollars are used most effectively, but we do have, of course, many parts of our districts and across the country that are underserved, and I think it's a continuing concern that dollars spent did not get to those people and may have been wasted in the process, and so I think this committee needs to direct the administration and encourage them in the right direction. So would appreciate you taking another look at that and maybe making some recommendations. Another topic that we have discussed in previous years that I know you had an audit regarding at the end of 2016 regarded the incident surrounding the January 2015 New York Times article regarding the Meat Animal Research Center in Nebraska. And there were some pretty salacious allegations in that article, and in the world of fake news now we have to really vet everything that's being said because there were some allegations there that was pretty shocking to the committee. I know you took a number of years, or at least since 2015, to identify and investigate 33 statements that were in that article that you tried to determine whether they were accurate. And I think your report found that 7 were materially accurate, 26 were inaccurate, lacked sufficient context, or were uncorroborated, a 21% material accuracy rate. This committee is fully supportive of the important research that has been done at ARS, that's being done at ARS, but we also want to ensure that it's being done ethically and appropriately and consistent with our American values. I noted in the statements that you try to corroborate. A number of them, you noted that we have no observations on the status at this time of the statements, that there were a number of statements that were redacted. I guess I would ask, is your work complete on this matter? How are we able to complete our oversight in areas in which you have no observations on the status of the statements or that they were redacted? I think we still would like to get to the facts and the truth of this matter, and it's been raised in this committee before, and I think we have an obligation to do so. And so your report helps us in that direction, but I feel like there's some incomplete work and wondered if that is something you're going to continue, or does this committee need to continue to seek out the facts in that article and what's clearly happening? And I don't really want to repeat the allegations, but many in this committee who's been on here a number of years remembers some of the disturbing statements that were made.
Let me offer a few comments, and Gil might have some more. We have finished our audit of U.S. Mark. We issued 2 reports. There was an interim report last year, and then a final report several months later. And so at this time, we do not have any ongoing work planned or in process. Now, I think with respect to the redactions, we had some sensitive information in our report that impacted on potentially personal privacy issues. They involved some allegations, and there was a potential consequence for the safety of individuals, which is why the public-facing version of that report has some redactions. We would be happy to brief you and your staff in a little more detail on that if you would like that. And Gil, I'll offer.
Yeah, that was the main point I wanted to add. We have come to conclusions on all 33 statements, but because of some of the redactions, you can't see it in the public-facing report, but be happy to set up a time to brief you on that.
Okay, well, I think I'd be interested in that, and I think maybe the committee might be interested in more clarity on some of the statements. In the areas in which you weren't unable to verify or corroborate the statements, I think we still have an obligation to find the truth, and so I'd like to also probably know why you couldn't get the information, why you couldn't interview people, what was the blockade that allowed us to not actually find out what happened in many of these situations. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
A lot of that is explained in the unredacted version, so we can get that information to you.
Mr. Laurel.
If I just, a couple of quick things before I ask a couple of questions, if I get into it. I just want to be clear on this last ARS animal welfare report. I just want just clarity of language. It's not a question of whether or not the allegations, if you will, were unfounded. It is that there was the inability or whatever the circumstances were around corroboration versus whether or not the allegations, et cetera, were unfounded.
No, I would say some of the allegations were unfounded based on the work that we were able to do.
But was it, and that was, were you able to corroborate that they were
Yes, some of them we were able to corroborate that they were accurate. Others we weren't able to find information to corroborate that they were true.
when you deal with context, what was the context? What does lacking context mean?
That there was other information available, say, in ARS's files at Mark or in discussions with people that they put different light around what was being said in the article.
But what I'm just trying to get to, that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It means that there was other information. I think the point is to try to get at the accuracy, to get at the information, to let us know what happened here and what we need to be mindful of, so that it's not putting stuff that was, you know, what needed to come to light didn't come to light. And it may not be that the allegation was wrong. There was a different set of circumstances, different information that people brought to this issue. I just think that this is particularly important, and I think we have to be careful with language and how we describe, in essence, what this is all about, because it's a very critically serious issue, which we need to address in some way. Also, just very, very quickly on, you talked about improper payments. That includes, and I believe the chairman talked about the nutrition programs, but farm programs as well have improper payments in terms of reporting. The crop insurance program has an improper payment rate, which is about 2.2%. That's high enough for a program to be at high risk. Conservation farm programs, as I understand it, have an improper payment rate of about 22%. What I would love to get from you is I want to see all of the improper payment rates, the error rates of all of the farm programs that you deal with, so that we can have some way to take a look at where the high priorities are. Let me just get to this, really, because this committee has tried to provide all of you with the resources that you need to do your job. So I was struck with your testimony mentions that you're again at the lowest staffing level since 1978 due to a number of staff losses. There has recently been, the administration has put a hiring freeze as of the 23rd of January. The memorandum regarding the hiring freeze, how will that impact the mission of your work? And do you feel that you have the adequate resources and the staffing to pursue criminal activity beyond just the SNAP program, about which you spend about almost 60% of your resources?
Yes, the hiring.
I mean, 56% of your resources, I take that back, or 59%. I've got to get my numbers right. 59% almost of your resources go to the SNAP effort.
The hiring freeze does impact us, as it does every part of the federal
How?
government.
What does that mean?
Well, we have about 40 vacancies right now, and we need to figure out how we can move forward to identify the critical vacancies involved with health and safety, which are potentially exempt from the freeze, as well as other priority vacancies which would require
What task
approval.
would you, because I got 14 seconds left. Tell me what you will not be able to do as a result of a hiring freeze.
If we were able to fully fund all 40 of those jobs, we would be able to do more investigations and more audits, and we could provide you some additional concrete information.
Anything further?
Thank you for your support.
Mr. Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, my colleagues. Welcome, Inspector General and Mr. Harden and Ms. Coffey. I want to just reflect on something my counterpart here said, Mr. Yoder, about the USDA's Rural Utility Service Broadband Program. Good intentions can really make a difference, but it's been fraught with some real trouble, I think. And it sounds like the last time you did an audit on this was in 2013, and maybe it's been a few years that we may need to relook at this, because we want to make sure that taxpayer dollars are used appropriately, and they're not out there being used to compete against services that are already out there, that is, you know, where people really had skin in the game and risking their own capital out there. We want to make sure the priority is for unserved areas, and so we may be back asking some further questions throughout this process. You mentioned in your testimony about the Prairie Pothole region, and Iowa is one of those 4 states in the Prairie Pothole region. And, you know, the NRCS administers the wetlands provisions in the Prairie Pothole region. The NRCS has discretion and responsibility in making those determinations. But recently, they've changed their ways in making those determinations. And how did you find out about that they were changing their ways? Was it a whistleblower? Mr. Harden, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, we did receive a couple of whistleblower complaints.
Okay.
That made the allegations, and then we followed up from that and learned as we went through the process basically how they were making determinations in that region of the country contradicted what they've done or how they've made determinations for the last 20 years.
So what were the pre-96 determinations? How were they different from?
They weren't
both?
accepting them as being wetland determinations unless, you know, additional work was done with regard to the pre-96 determinations. They weren't accepted on their face.
Okay, so they totally changed their playbook on this.
That was the way we understood it.
Okay. And when they did this, did they provide any written guidance or notice to folks?
No, and that was also part of our problem or our concerns with it.
Okay, so since then, you've done your due diligence and investigated this. Are you confident that the NRCS has heard the message and the intent of the original law and rules, and are they back to square one and being consistent? Are they providing certainty?
I would have to wait and see how they actually implement the recommendations. They agreed to the recommendations we made in terms of providing additional clarity as to how you were supposed to be using those pre-1996 determinations.
How long should we wait for them to let us know that?
I think that I'd have to go back and get the exact date of when they were going to have that implemented. I think it's going to be later this spring. So maybe, you know, in the fall, you know, the summer or fall, they should be able to explain what they're doing.
Okay, and will you relook at that to make sure that that is being done in a satisfactory manner?
We can take that in, yes.
Okay, I may be contacting you folks and asking for some help, because we want to make sure that there's consistency, there's transparency, and farmers know what the rules are each and every year as we go along with this. I sit next to Mr. Palazzo here, an auditor, and he was peeking at one of my questions, and he said, hey, I'm the accountant, you stick to wetlands questions, but I think it may be something that is sometimes always on our minds about what you do. You audit and you have investigations and you make recommendations on corrective actions. How much monitoring do you do to see if they carry out these recommendations? And is it even really your job, or is that something that we should all be looking at? I know that's partly why we're here. But how much do you do to follow up to make sure that they're following up on recommendations, or at least reminding them of them?
We try to do a fair amount of it because following up on audit recommendations is, to do that, you have to follow audit standards, you have to follow up on prior work that you've done, recommendations that you've made. So it's just a standard course for a lot of it. Sometimes we do specific areas like conservation stewardship to see that they implemented what they said they were going to do. Prairie Pothole, we'll do things like that. With food safety, we've had stuff. This year, we also undertook an audit to look at what the CFO's office does in terms of tracking final action.
So you look at it, but you need some better partners here, and that's Congress, in doing oversight and in ensuring that some of these recommendations are followed through. But how much enforcement do you have, if any? Do you have, what boundaries or leeways do you really have, or do you have any at all, aside from public shaming through your reports and working with us to bring these things to light?
We don't have any operational authority.
Just wanted to verify
We
that.
have a soapbox to make recommendations.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your testimony. Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today and for your many years of service and dedication to helping us with supporting this department and making sure it works efficiently. First, I just want to thank the ranking member for asking some of the questions around scientific integrity, and I appreciate the fact that your report is coming out soon. Thank you for digging into that. There's been recent questions around scientific integrity and, is any information being shut down at executive branch departments? So it's very timely, but as you know, I also sent a letter in 2015 about allegations that researchers at the USDA doing research around neonicotinoids were being suppressed, and so I've had an interest in this, and certainly my constituents and others have for a while. So we'll really be looking forward to that report, and probably we'll have some questions when it comes out, but thank you for doing that. I just want to ask about a different topic. I think you know there's been huge growth in the organic market. According to the USDA's 2014 survey, certified and exempt organic farms in the United States sold a total of $5.5 billion in organic products back in 2014. That's about a 72% increase in 2018. So from my perspective, that's huge opportunities for farmers in my district, but virtually every district represented here has had farmers who have benefited from being able to sell into this markets, often with higher prices and less competition. So it's a great area for economic growth for our farmers. And it's not just specialty crops, it's commodity crops. It's really in every area. And there's no question we haven't been able to keep up with demand from the most giant of the food processors in this country to the smallest farmers markets. The demand is bigger than we can handle, especially for organic grains. So there's a lot of product being imported into the United States. According to the USDA, in 2013, the value of U.S. organic imports that are tracked was $1.4 billion. So that's 2013. There's been enormous growth, and we're already in 2017. So that's a lot of money. And consumers, more than anything else, want to know that the products that they buy are everything that they're paying for. And they want to know that imported products are grown to the same high standards that we require here in the United States. So I'm wondering if you've looked into organic products at all, but specifically this idea of organic imports. And are there things you're doing to assure customers that all of the organic products coming in from other countries are produced with the same organic certification?
Let me just quickly offer a comment. We do have some ongoing audit work on precisely that issue, which I'll ask Gil to comment on. I also want to note that on our investigation side, we have had a few cases over the past few years alleging that certificates or statements of organics have not been truly true, and we've had some very successful convictions and prosecutions there involving grains and fertilizers as well. So Ann might want to comment on those.
That's great.
Currently, we are finishing work on AMS's oversight of international trade arrangements and agreements. And the basic thrust or the objective of that work is to understand how AMS evaluates the equivalency of foreign countries' organic processes so that we know that what's being imported into the U.S. meets our standards as well. We expect that report to be out later this spring as well.
I was just going to mention that we just completed an investigation involving a fraud scheme where a producer basically was claiming that his product, which was alfalfa, was organic, but in fact it was not. It was sold, it was grown conventionally, and the profit margin that he obtained by being able to claim that his product was organic was over $2 million. So he was sentenced and convicted recently, and we got restitution of $3 million. So we do pursue those investigations when we become aware of them, although we haven't had any related to the import, but I anticipate probably that will be something we're looking at in the future.
Well, I do appreciate that, and I'm aware of some of the investigations you've done in the United States, and I think those are critically important because, as we know, inputs and the techniques that are used for organic processing can be much more expensive. So it's devastating to those farmers who play by the rules, and it's devastating consumers because this has been a very protected brand, and anything that happens to sort of lose that credibility of the brand, I think is a real loss to those farmers. Again, it's a great market for the farmers who are able to participate in it. There's still a lot of competition there. The prices are better. So it's been my contention that the USDA, and this isn't your side of it, but that the USDA should be doing more to assist farmers with organic research, with organic transition, making it easier for farmers to get into what is sometimes a challenge to change to. And I think one of the critically important facts to have is, because so much is being bought in the foreign market, an understanding of how much of that is actually, fraudulent, how much is being purchased today that really isn't up to the same standards. It's something consumers want to know, but I think it's also a fact that could help push the USDA to assist more farmers in moving to the organic market. So I'm way out of time, but thank you very much for the work you're doing, and I'll look forward to following up on what you're seeing in the foreign imports.
Thank you. Mr. Palazzo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Fong and company. Thank y'all for being here today. Last year, we discussed the Commodity Credit Corporation's delayed financial statement. This year, you mentioned in your testimony the CCC's weakness and deficiencies in its financial statements for fiscal year 2016. Several deficiencies were identified with the CCC's balance sheets and internal processes that resulted in significant issues with the CCC's accounting systems. This year is one of the highest funding levels for the CCC on record at $21 billion. Yet the Congressional Budget Office is estimating the CCC alone will save $14 billion more than it did compared to its original 2014 Farm Bill estimate. Additionally, the difference between the estimates provided to the committee for the CCC in August of 2016 and the actual net realized losses was about $3 billion. With the upcoming Farm Bill negotiations, it is important that we have accurate accounting estimates. For example, the discrepancy of $3 billion provided to the committee earlier this year could have resulted in a $30 billion difference over the 10-year window in which the Congressional Budget Office uses to score. So I guess my question would be, can you tell me a little bit how you see accounting estimates, how important it is to try to make, we know it's an estimate, but how important it is to provide us with the best estimates possible, and that we get this right, and it's a huge concern of ours.
I would agree with you that we want them to be as best as they can be. Some of the things that we saw and that you've seen in their financial statements for 16 was that they had a significant problem getting the estimates together, or they came late in the year. So I think some of those will be better going forward because they've gotten a better process down. One of them with like ARC PLC, they didn't include all the crops that they were supposed to to begin with, and so they had to go back and redo the estimate toward the end of the year, and so that amount was understated for financial reporting purposes. But we continue to work with KPMG, who's the main auditor for them, but also knowing how they're going about developing those estimates and having them grounded in the right accounting theories and things of that nature.
Was this the first time they audited the financial statements?
No.
Okay, so it's not a new auditor coming on board, so they
No,
should.
this is the second year for KPMG, but KPMG has also done it on a prior cycle as well.
Now, is our understanding that this review of the CCC was a one-time, like taking a snapshot of the financials? Do you believe that we should do a deeper review? And if so, is there something that's restricting y'all from doing that, such as funding or personnel?
I don't think there's something that's keeping us from doing a deeper dive. They've had annual financial statements for a number of years because they're required to do so. In 15, they got the disclaimer, and so coming back off of that, and that also drove a disclaimer for the department. So starting in 16, they started with just a balance sheet only approach to get to final balances, and what they're hoping to do is to go to full statements this year, all 5 statements. We're in discussions with them and KPMG right now as to understanding their readiness to withstand an audit and going forward. And I would like to probably get back with you after we've had some other discussions as part of that planning to have a more detailed answer.
Can you tell me what actions are being taken to correct the deficiencies and the findings from the audit report?
I'd have to pull the corrective action plans, but they do have things that they're doing to address the weaknesses.
And how often do y'all monitor that to see that they're clearing the deficiencies and findings?
That's part of the standard audit process for the financial statement auditors, and as the overseers of the ones doing it for KPMG, we are on the calls with them weekly and all the discussions that they have with CCC.
Are they clearing any of these deficiencies and findings from year to year? So, I mean, are they improving their internal controls? What would be your?
From 15 to 16, the wording of them changed, but some of the same issues were there. So, and in 16, because they only did the balance sheet audit, we didn't look at the ones that impacted the statement of budgetary resources. So we'll have to be, as part of this year's review, that will get to be part of what is looked at and where they've done.
Ms. Young.
I'd just like to offer a higher level comment in response to your questions. As we've seen at USDA, CCC had a disclaimer last year, as did, and NRCS has had a disclaimer for 6 or 7 years. And as a result, last year, the consolidated for the whole department was disclaimed. This past year, the most recent year, because we moved to a balance sheet only approach for NRCS and CCC and the department, they were able to make some forward progress. But in order to really bring the whole department to a full, clean opinion, it's going to take some concerted effort. What we have seen in the past with NRCS, and before that with Forest Service, was when those agencies received their initial disclaimed opinion, it took them, with NRCS and Forest Service, 5, 6, 7 years of intense effort, high management priority, resources at the agency level, and a commitment to really fix the underlying issues in order to move those agencies to the clean stage. And we're still working with NRCS on that. So with respect to CCC, we're cautiously optimistic. We know that they want to get to the finish line. We will be keeping a very close eye on this, and we'll have to just keep you all apprised of that progress.
Okay. Well, thank you. And of course, senior leaders need to buy into the importance of financial statements and audits, because the end users who use this information, I mean, they make decisions as well as Congress does on what's provided to us. And so it needs to be accurate and it needs to be complete. So thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Mr. Buchanan.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. And thank you for being here today. I have to admit, I'm really heartened to hear the chairman, the ranking member, Mr. Yoder, and Mr. Young all bring up rural broadband, because in my district, it's one of the biggest issues, and I can get a little obsessive on it. My office is probably glad I'm talking to someone else about it rather than them right now. But I live in a rural town of 800 people. My district, even though Madison's about a third of it, I would argue 40 to 50% is very rural, and this is a huge issue. So when it comes to that rural utility service loans, while they're very important, we also would love to see you look maybe at some of the best practices and what states are doing effectively with the dollars. In Wisconsin, we have some of the lowest speeds in the country, and as you know, 1 Mbps. There's a lot of 1 Mbps out there, but 8 is about what's the minimum for satisfactory levels. So what we don't have is speed. We actually have a lot of people who have lines, but they don't have any speed. And the neighbors down my street, the kids can't do homework. So I guess it's not so much a question as I want to echo that, and I hope that this hiring freeze, this arbitrary hiring freeze, doesn't affect the ability to do an important audit on something that you're getting this bipartisan kind of chorus on. But you'll hear me talk about rural broadband a lot, and this is something that I'd like to encourage as well, whatever we can do in that area. The two other areas I'd like to get to in SNAP, and specifically in Wisconsin. So when you look at programs, Wisconsin, we have some problems with how we do it. One, how we count job placements. If the first part of a month you have a job, and then the second part of the month you have a different job, they count that as 2 separate job placements, and some of the numbers are kind of arbitrary. There have been complaints filed at the Department of Labor on the companies that people are told they have to work at in order to get the benefits. So we're actually putting people in jeopardy who are, just trying to get simple food assistance in the state. And we've had very uneven results across the state and how the effectiveness has been. So I guess the question is, as we have a lot of resources going to ensure that SNAP works as intended, can you look at, or have you looked at states like Wisconsin to investigate how they're potentially mismanaging some of these federal resources and putting people in jeopardy through the program.
Yeah, let me just comment on that. We did an audit this year of the able-bodied adults without dependents provisions, which I think discussed some of the very complex issues with respect to work requirements and waivers and eligibility. And our main conclusion from that audit was that it's a very complex area. The states are administering it in many different ways. FNS could do a much better job of providing some clarity and some consistency on interpretation from the national level to enable the states to really get to providing the assistance where it's deserved. Gil, you want to?
I mean, just adding to that, as we learned doing that work, that those provisions are some of the most complicated ones that states have to deal with, and they really didn't have the guidance they needed from FNS to do what they needed to do, so that a lot of them were just without direction and knowing what to do. Part of the recommendations we made are aimed at getting more clarity to them, more communications, what are best practices, what do some states do that others don't, that could be spread.
And a quick follow-up on that report. I think, you talked about 55% or so of the resources going devoted to ensuring SNAP works as intended. Some of that is on fraud, and some of it is simply on payment errors. Can you just talk a drop on that? Because I want to get to one other subject in my minute and a half, if I can.
A couple of years ago, we did a report on the QC error rate, and yes, we found that states were I want to say gaming the system, but there were many ways that they were going about determining their rates and working to make their rates lower as opposed to knowing what the actual rate was. But it wasn't necessarily fraud, it was overpayments and underpayments.
And then I guess the last area, I think I got a minute I can get into, is on meat inspectors. There's been a new chemical, PAA, I think, that's been used pretty widely, sprayed on people in poultry packing processing plants, and it's a highly corrosive agent. And the workers are being exposed to it, and I think there's some questions about how this got approved and whether or not it's impacting workers. A number of us did a letter to a couple secretaries on this issue, but I'm just kind of wondering, no one seems to really exactly understand the process, how this was approved, and if you've looked at that, or if there's a way to look at that so we can get more clarity on something that people are concerned for the health of the workers in these facilities.
We haven't done specific work, but I can go back and ask some questions to find out.
If you could, it'd be much appreciated. And again, anything on rural broadband would be awesome, because we formed a rural broadband caucus, bipartisan caucus, have a lot of members. There's 6 of us, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans who are co-chairing it. Just a real big priority for businesses and for education in my district. And I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Valdeo.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. And in prior reports, USDA's Office Inspector General has identified cases of fraud, waste, and abuse in multifamily housing program. In some instances, applicants had not provided accurate household income information and therefore were not eligible for all or part of the financial assistance they received. However, do not have the independent source, any wage matching mechanism to verify this information. The report went on to recommend that USDA Rural Development seek the same authorities that the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, has for family property managers to access federal income and benefits database and implement wage matching of the tenants applying for rental subsidies. This committee provided the legislative authority that would enable USDA's rural housing services access to databases managed by the Department of Health and Human Services, Social Security Administration, and the Internal Revenue Service, similar to what HUD uses for income verification in the fiscal year 2016 funding law. The authority we provided should have enabled USDA to access the data through the HUD systems. The question is HHS has stated the legislative authority we provided does not enable USDA to access databases through HUD systems. We agreed with your prior recommendation to provide access to these databases, but continue to look for a way to implement a means to access that does not require reworking the tax code or other statutory authorities. Could you provide any insight into making this recommendation a reality?
I think this information is very interesting and useful to us. We were not aware of that development. and we can certainly go back and see what we can find out, and see if we can come up with any thoughts on that.
All right, well,
Yeah,
then I'll go
thank
to
you.
my other question. In the September audit report on reducing improper payments, OIG states that fiscal year 2015 USDA had a decrease of more than 92% in high dollar overpayments from the previous year. That sounds pretty impressive, but then the report notes that OMB issued new higher overpayment thresholds from $5,000 to $25,000 for individuals and from $25,000 to $100,000 for entities for fiscal year 2015. When these thresholds are raised, naturally the number and sum of overpayments is going to decrease. USDA had a total of 1,301 high dollar overpayments reported in fiscal year 2014, and that dropped to 99 in fiscal year 2015, under the OMB's new threshold. When the previous administration raised these thresholds, seems like they swept a lot of improper payments under the rug. Do you believe having a higher threshold is a disservice to taxpayers and serves to cover up the amount of improper payments?
Well, I think we need to look at that development in the overall context of all the improper payment rules, regulations, and work that goes on. It's true that the high dollar thresholds were raised, and so that had an impact, and we give the department credit for making progress. But I think perhaps more important is looking at the work we're doing on the overall improper payment rate for the department, which we found in FY16 actually went up significantly from FY15. The FY15 overall improper payment rate for the high-risk programs was 5.7%. In FY16, it went up to 8.86%, and that, to me, is perhaps a more meaningful number for us to focus on in terms of what can be done to address the overall portfolio of improper payments.
All right. I understand that some states are interested in doing more to combat fraud. This requires states to have access to the same information FNS, OIG, and others use at the federal level. I believe your report says that the two systems containing retailer information and transactions, STARS and Alert, are used by FNS program personnel, FNS investigators, and OIG investigators. Do states have access to this information? And if not, do you see any harm in the states having access to this information as well, if they want to detect and stop fraudulent activities?
Yeah, we don't know if the states have access to Alert and STARS. I think there are other tools that the states have that they can use to address potential fraud. EATers, I think, is one of the systems. They certainly can deal with Social Security numbers and some other tools. So I think there are opportunities out there for the states to do data matching and address indicators of fraud. And those tools are available. We're right now assessing how well the states are looking at eligibility questions. We should have a number of reports coming out this year on how well they're doing.
All right, well, I mean, it would make sense, more information for some of these states and some of my other questions to help, obviously, root out the waste, fraud, and abuse. So appreciate your time. Thank you. Chairman, I yield back.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just ask a couple of questions about the two reports here, the audit reports. The first one, the FNS controls over SNAP benefits for able-bodied adults without dependents. You know, it's kind of striking. The report kind of indicates that it's just a very difficult program to implement in states, and that states kind of game the difficulty a little bit. You know, I'll quote from page 5. You know, the report says, due to the burden of implementing the ABAWD provisions, officials in 3 states told us they specifically requested time limit waivers as in many parts of the state as possible to minimize the areas where they needed to track the time limits. And I guess the conclusion is that it's just difficult to tell what's what, and actually conclusion in that paragraph on page 5 is therefore the ABAWDs may or may not be required to work depending on the state they live in. I don't think that's the intent of Congress, that actually this is implemented differing in different states, kind of depending on whether they want to collect data or not. Is there a practical, do your recommendations, the management recommendations you make, do you think they can end this practice of this heterogeneity of how this program is administered or managed?
I would say that we would hope that it should. I mean, we'll have to go back and look and see how they put forth those best practices. And this is another time when we didn't feel like FNS was playing the right oversight role with the states and communicating with folks and really knowing what's going on. This was hopefully brings that to the table. They can have some discussions and decide how they're going to move forward, but then we would have to go back in and do follow-up work to find out how well it took.
How many, if I might ask, because I didn't dig through this, how many states did you investigate for this audit report, for that audit report? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I think it was 3 or 4. We went to 3 or 4 states. But
3 or 4.
I can get you the names if we need be.
Okay, so it's and I guess based on that, there was so consistent in this. The heterogeneity was so consistent that I guess you extrapolate that this exists across the country.
Let me back up. I had a better memory as you were saying that, because I think we went to a handful of states, but then we also talked to a lot of other states. So it wasn't just a handful that we would be extrapolating from, but talking to them about their difficulties with the program and how they operated it.
Well, no, thank you very much for doing that, because we certainly, as you know, a lot of us feel that people fall on tough times, but able-bodied adults without dependents, should be out getting a job if they can and working, not necessarily depending upon, the federal government. Now, the other report, the SNAP Administrative Cost Report, I think what's striking to me is that, and now in this report, my understanding is you did only look at 3 states. Is that right, for this? But in looking at those 3 states, you actually, one of the states was California, and I guess because that had was an outlier in maybe what the administrative costs were. But the conclusion was that there was and I'll call it a clawback, I guess, of $111 million in unobligated, where the obligation should be clawed back. Is that right? Wow, that's a lot of money. Which I think points to one of the problems with this program in and of itself is that the states don't have a lot of skin in the game. It's not their $111 million unless we go after it and claw it back. Given that you only saw 3 states, you only looked at 3 states. I mean, how do you think the problem you saw in California exists in other states? And then, in fact, we're not looking at just I hate to say it in Washington, only $111 million in clawbacks, but in fact that the number nationwide would be quite larger if we looked at all the states.
I think it could if you looked at more states. Now, the ones that have county-administered programs, there's only 10 states that do it county-administered, but the reason we focused on those is they have half of the administrative costs, like $1.8 billion of the $3.6 billion for 14, which is the numbers we started with. And what we also found was that FNS they were not consistent in how they were doing their reviews. Using the California example as a way of explaining it, they were a big state for the Western region. The Western region only looked at California itself once every 5 years. The Western Regional Office for FNS didn't even go down to the counties where they administer them. Compare that to the Northeast region, where looking at New York and New York City, they go to New York City every year, and New York every year because of the size. So different regions approached it differently, and that was part of our message to FNS was, there need to be some consistency, and if you've got lots of money in the game, you really probably ought to be out there more often.
And was your finding that they used estimates instead of actual expenditures? That was one of the major findings, I think. Do you think that's true, whether or not it's county administered? I mean, was this done on the state level administered programs as well, or? Hard to say.
That I don't know, but the Western region was very lax with California, and what it did was it fed misinformation back to what you could look at the national level in terms of what your actual costs were.
Okay, thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you. Oh, Ms. Fong, you mentioned in your written testimony that there are several different examples of monetary restitution, include almost $100 million under the SNAP program, $7.6 million in a case involving child nutrition programs, $3.3 million in a case involving FSA loans, and a total of $30.8 million in other farm programs. Can you tell us how much of this money will the federal government actually recoup? and actually go back to the U.S. Treasury?
Let me offer some comments and invite Ann to comment as well. The restitution orders are as the end result of the judicial process, and the court will order the restitution based on the amount of loss to the government program. You raise a very good question as to how much of that will actually be recovered, and I think that could range depending on the situation, may not be 100%, and I don't believe we track that.
We don't. Once we complete our judicial process, that tracking for whatever restitution gets paid is done by the Department of Justice. They're the ones, any monies that are ordered for restitution should be returned to the U.S. Treasury. But we do not track that information once the restitution amounts are set by the court. The Department of Justice is the entity that tracks that information as to what percentage actually goes back to the Treasury.
And just to add on, the money goes to the general fund, not to USDA.
That's correct.
Yes, yeah, right, U.S. Treasury. Is there anything or any advice or suggestions that we could do as in Congress to help agencies to recover these funds that were obtained illegally or fraudulently, or something more than that we're doing now?
Well, I think with respect to restitution, actual payment of an order of restitution will depend on the defendant's assets and whether they have sufficient assets to pay it back. Now, there are other times when we make recommendations to the department that it go after money that is owed to the department. It may not be in the context of a criminal sentence of restitution. It may be in the context of an audit recommendation. For example, the one we were just discussing with California and the SNAP, $111 million, where we recommend to FNS that FNS go back and recoup that money. And I think in those situations, attention and oversight from the committee would be very helpful to make sure that those recommendations get implemented and resolved.
Let me move on to one other issue that I think is real pertinent here for us in this subcommittee. In a recent audit report that you did on the effectiveness of the Foreign Agricultural Services monitoring coordination of trade agreements, you identified that there are 4 areas where USDA was lacking, and these areas were key to trade negotiations, involved a lack of internal control process, goal setting, and overall coordination. Of course, we understand that the U.S. Trade Representative is the lead agency for negotiating trade agreements. But USDA plays an important role in providing support for the agriculture sector in removing non-tariff trade barriers such as sanitary and phytosanitary obstacles. Just yesterday, on the Senate side, they made it was made clear that the stakes for U.S. agricultural team and new market access were very important. That was in the Finance Committee over on the Senate side. This subcommittee has been one of the main proponents on the Hill for completing the Farm Bill mandate that USDA establish an Undersecretary for Trade and Agricultural Affairs. At my request, money was included in the FY15 appropriation bills to do a study, since the one mandated by the Farm Bill is now almost 3 years late. In FY16, at my request, money was also included to help with the implementation of this new Undersecretary. That money still remains available for use. Is it your opinion that having an Undersecretary in place that focuses on trade issues will help with coordination and also complete your recommendation with the report?
Well, let me just mention that I recall we discussed this issue last year, and at that time there had not been an Undersecretary appointed, and at that time FAS was in the middle of doing its study, at least that was our understanding. We have not really been tracking that issue. I think it's fair to say that, as with any other issue, leadership is critical to making progress on our recommendations, and that leadership from the policy level is important, whether it's from the Secretary or the Subcabinet, whoever it may be at the time. What we see in the trade arena is the need for FAS to really focus on how does it measure its success. Is that measurement objective? Is it based on data? Are there performance measures that can be reported to Congress where you can say, yes, this is what we did and this is how we did it and it's documented and measurable? That's what the gist of our recommendations goes to, and to the extent that leadership from the department can bring focus to that, we would welcome that.
So, so it'd be safe to say you've not received any requests or been active or consulted in setting up with a new secretary regarding this?
To my best of my knowledge, we have not been consulted on this issue.
Okay, well, you know, I think now may be an opportune time during this transition that to set up this new secretary, and so we would encourage that any way possible as you move forward.
I would add that I was tracking how the last administration was handling this, and I noticed when the prior secretary said that they were basically pushing it down the road. So, because I was trying to find out when they were going to say what they were going to say, so we could figure out how they were going to proceed with it, to whether it would be a good job or not. So it is something that is on our radar screen to look at.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to something Ms. Pingree started, but I want to deal with some problems with AMS procurement and inspection of fruits and vegetables. The Agriculture Marketing Service acts as the agent for the Food Nutrition Service, and at their request buys the food for the school nutrition programs and other USDA feeding programs. In your audit last year, you found a number of serious problems with the agency's work, including the failure to properly close out accounts and failure to ensure that products met the proper standards. I'd like to focus on another problem that you found, the failure to ensure that all products were 100% U.S. in origin. In fact, you found that in a sample of 97 purchase orders, 29 of them did not have sufficient documentation to prove that they were in compliance with the Buy America Act, and you found that almost $35 million in purchases were not proven to be of U.S. origin. I was somewhat shocked at this finding because compliance with Buy America is critically important to our farmers. They count on the government to abide by this requirement, and so do consumers. Would you discuss the problems and what AMS agreed to do to remedy them? And then I have another question regarding SNAP.
They did agree with our recommendations, and it's kind of like I've said with other matters, you know, they did recognize it was a problem, they shouldn't have done it. We'll have to do some follow-up on that to see how it got implemented in terms of corrective actions.
We can certainly look at that and get back to you and your staff on whether the recommendations have been implemented, and if not, what is the time frame for that?
Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Let's talk about data analysis and SNAP retailers. About a month ago, you issued a report that looked at SNAP retailer and transaction data, and you used special software to check Social Security numbers and ages of retailers. I fully support your work on this and other government programs, but I wanted you to go over your findings related to Social Security numbers and birth dates so that we can all view them in the proper perspective. And looking at both Social Security numbers and ages, you found very few discrepancies among the owners of the more than 200,000 authorized retailers. For each, there was 99% accuracy. FNS deserves credit for that, I think, for issued guidance to their staff on these issues quite a few years before your audit. Am I correct that you accepted the FNS management decision on all of your recommendations? And on the Social Security matching issue, FNS says it does not have the legal authority to access Social Security numbers for this purpose, so they can't do a match. They need legislative authority to do so. Do you agree that FNS doesn't have the legal authority to match Social Security numbers?
Sir, I would have to go back and look, because I thought we were using some of the Social Security information that they already had in our analysis, but let me go back and take a closer look on that question.
Thank you. I've got about a minute left, so let me ask you about the 2501 program update. In keeping with my theme last year of increasing diversity access across the department, I'd like to inquire about the 2501 program, which has been critical in providing assistance and supports to disadvantaged farmers, to HBCUs, and to others. Your FY17 budget justification, OIG cited Section 2501 program as its first example of recent progress within the department. Can you provide us with an update on current operations and management of the 2501 program and whether it's meeting its statutory mandate and mission?
We have not done recent work on that issue. When we issued our audit report, we reached decision, the agency agreed with our recommendations, and I think at this point what we could do is go back and find out the status of our recommendations to make sure that they have actually implemented them.
Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking over your testimony and some of the programs that you've been investigating and auditing, I'm stuck here at IT security. And you have a relationship with the Office of Chief Information Officer. Probably a closer relationship because of the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, which came into play in 2014 in law. And it says in fiscal years 2009 through 2015, the OIG made 61 recommendations for improving the overall security of the USDA systems, 18 of which are overdue for completion. So that was in 2015. Do you know if those 18 of which are overdue for completion have been addressed since 2015 when you did that that last audit or investigation?
We'll have to, that will be something that we'll also follow up in this year's cycle. As we finished last year's cycle last November, they were overdue. Some of them may have gotten completed since then, but we're just starting up this year's review of FISMA.
And then it says, moreover, our testing identified that security weaknesses still exist in 3 of the 39 closed recommendations. With information technology security weaknesses and holes that are out there, and it's through private industry, it's through our personal computers, it's through public systems. At the USDA, what's at risk? What information is at risk?
Well, I think, as you know, all of the federal agencies are dependent on IT to deliver their programs. And so at USDA, you're looking at a broad array of databases in the farm program agencies, certainly the
So we're looking at numbers and data and statistics, but we're also looking at the names of producers who receive payments, individuals and families receiving benefits, whether it's a SNAP, WIC, whatever, loan and grant recipient information. Could their identifying information be subject to hacking and being stolen because of some information that is attached to names, Social Security numbers, USDA account information, bank information? The reason I ask this is I lead a bipartisan task force with Kirsten Sinema, Democrat from Arizona. And it's a congressional task force to prevent identity theft and fraud. There's a lot of frauds and scams out there, but we also need to make sure that if we are being a caretaker of the taxpayers and their personal information, we need to be doing a better job of that. Do you think that Social Security information, bank account information, names, addresses are subject to risk here with the holes that you found in the IT systems at the USDA?
I think you have really put your finger on the risk to the department. The risk to the department is significant. We believe it is a material risk, that the data systems currently are not sufficiently secured at the department level and as they roll down through the agencies. And of course, there's all kinds of data in the department systems. And you mentioned the outstanding recommendations that we have with respect to IT security. We've seen the department make some progress, but there is a long way to go. And as we all are very aware of some of the breaches around the federal government and other departments and agencies, we are aware that that risk exists for USDA as well.
Would you know how many times the USDA tests their systems, or would that be a question for the Office of the Chief Information Officer?
OCIO would have a probably more ready answer, but we will go back and look and see what we can find out.
We'll be in touch. Thank you for being here today. I yield back.
Mr. Laurel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fong, I'm just going to ask, but I put it in writing as well, and I want to ask you to put in writing for this committee what the effect of the hiring freeze will mean for your department. I want to know what the 40 slots are and what areas that they covered. As I listened to my colleagues this morning, we've talked about RUS, ARS, organics, housing, trade, recently IT, security, all areas of great interest to this committee, and 58.5% of your current resources are spent on the SNAP program. We have an interest in the SNAP program. It has a big claim on what we do, but there are a lot of issues here that truly are going begging, and you now have a hiring freeze, so I want it detailed, and I also want to know what those error reports, error numbers are on improper payments for all of the farm programs under your jurisdiction. Let me get to an ethics question. Everyone here is aware of the issue involving the promotion of Ivanka Trump's clothing line by the White House staffer Kellyanne Conway. Chairman Chaffetz, and in a bipartisan way, sent a letter which said that the remarks were clearly over the line. He and Ranking Member Cummings asked the Office of Government Ethics to investigate, recommend appropriate disciplinary action. There are other examples of, as well. Press Secretary Spicer talked about go to the Trump International Hotel. It's stunning, etc. Now, the White House does not have an inspector general. There is no inspector general there. So the only option may be to go to the Office of Government Ethics. Consistent with legislation that passed the House by a landslide in the 104th Congress, I have introduced a bill to provide for an IG at the White House. I'm wondering, though, about your role at USDA on ethics matters. First, I understand that many agencies have standard penalties for employee misconduct, like what happened with Ms. Conway. Example, employees at Customs and Border Protection reportedly are subject to a 14-day suspension for a first offense and removal from their position for a second offense. Do you have at USDA standard penalties like what CBP has for such misconduct? Can you tell us what they are? Can you tell us approximately how many ethics issues you take up annually?
Let me offer some comments, and then Ann will have some additional comments. We do have jurisdiction over allegations that the ethics rules and regulations and statutes have been violated, and the department requires in its regulations that any concern or allegations about violations be brought to our attention so that we can evaluate them and handle them. With respect to potential violations, if it's a violation of a criminal ethics statutes, which sometimes those violations can exist, primarily conflict of interest or post-employment issues. There are statutory penalties for that could involve imprisonment or monetary fines, and that would go through the justice process.
But you then have established there are fines and penalties that
For potential criminal violations.
well, I'm talking about civil issues
Right.
as well.
And on the administrative or civil side,
Right.
if it doesn't rise to the level of a criminal violation, but it's an administrative violation,
Yeah.
the department has tables of penalties, I believe we call them, which we can provide.
I would like to see that. Do you take up these issues at all, the civil ethics issues?
It would depend on the situation. We would evaluate any incoming allegation and determine whether it's appropriate for us to move forward on that. We take these very seriously.
How many do you do a year?
So we currently, within FY15 and FY16, we have about 10 cases that have come in relative to ethics violations.
But you have a system in place to deal with this.
We do.
And most of the agencies have that system in place as well, as I understand it. The only place that does not have an IG is the White House. They don't have an inspector general. You don't have to answer that question. I know the answer to that question. There is no inspector general there to deal with these civil kinds of efforts. Let me get back on the ARS piece, if I can, for a moment. My understanding is that, and this is the animal welfare issue, that these were not unannounced inspections. They were essentially designed to see how the facility stood in terms of overall compliance. So that while ARS's policy for many years has been that its facilities must comply with the AWA, it is obvious that the policy was not enforced. APHIS inspectors found more than 150 AWA issues at the 20 facilities. Almost half of the issues related to the facilities' institutional review committees, that was just a key issue that was raised in that New York Times story. Many others related to basic care of animals. The facility that was the subject of the New York Times story had by far the most problems. Inspectors identified a total of 33 AWA issues problems, and Mark had to have 3 inspections, as I understand it, before it came up, quote, clean. So in essence, the Times was on target. But can you give us your thoughts on how agencies fall again and again into the trap of not making sure that their own policies are not effectively implemented? Now, it was, I think, our colleagues, Congressman Farr, who said none of this would have happened had it not been for the New York Times story. How do agencies continue to fall into this trap? Let me get your thoughts on that.
It's interesting. We had a very good conversation with the agency administrator as we were closing this one out, and what really caused
It's been closed out?
in closing out the audit and coming to what was being reported on, and talking to them about what the cause was. And from all of our work, we could tell that they had not made a priority of following those policies or making sure that they were followed. She was concerned that we worded it that way, but in the end, she said, you know, you're right. We didn't place the right priority on overseeing and implementing those policies as we should have, and we need to do better. So it was a lack of priority.
But this continues to happen. This is, and so what, let me just say, what is it that we should do, if you have thought about what we should do in terms of addressing this issue, which continues to happen? And again, if there had not been a New York Times story, this would never have reached the public. It would have never gotten anyone's attention on this subcommittee. So what is it that, and we need to think about what we should do in order to prevent these kinds of efforts from occurring again. It was 150 animal welfare issues at these 20 facilities. Can you give us your advice in what kind of legislation would assist you in what you have to do?
Well, I think you are putting your finger on the very basic challenge that faces program managers, and that Mr. Chairman identified that in his initial question as well. What can Congress do? What role do we play in the IG's office in terms of bringing some urgency to these issues? And in our experience and our observation, what we have found has been really effective is when you all, in the case of U.S. Mark, the chairman and the ranking member both asked us to do a review of it based on the New York Times article. And that was very effective. We were able to go in there and shine some light on it. I think that is the role that Congress plays. We've made some recommendations. Now it's time to oversee the implementation.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your thoughtfulness in the time. A final question, which goes back to my first question. You don't have the resources today to dig into the corners that we need to dig into in order to protect the public safety, in terms of food, in order to deal with broadband, in order to look at international organics coming into this effort, in order to deal with the housing issues that have been talked about here. So IT security, the whole 9 yards. You don't have the resources, as far as I can tell, with 40 open slots, to be able to dig into what you are charged with doing. And we keep asking you questions about this, but at some point, just say flat out, we don't have the resources and the staff to be able to go in the direction that the members of Congress would like us to go in.
Let me
And-
just in time's up. Let me just in closing, just regarding the New York Times article. Yeah, I know. Just closing this issue out. I'm sorry, not closing the hearing out. On that New York Times article, approximately how many of what percentage of that article was either inaccurate, lacked context, or uncorroborated?
I can't put a percentage on the article.
Over 50%?
I can't put a percentage on the whole article. We had to look at statements in that article that we felt we could objectively analyze and see if we could find evidence to support it or not. And that's where we came up with the 33 statements that we picked. Those were very judgmentally picked to look at, to see if we could corroborate what was being said.
Was 33 statements a big portion of the article, or was that just a very small portion of the article?
Let me go back and get a better percentage of the article, because I'm trying to remember how many pages the article was. I remember reading a multi-page article, and so I'll get you an answer for that.
Okay. All right.
Let me also observe that during the course of our audit, we tried numerous times to interview and speak with the writer, the author of the article, to gain his perspectives on it, and we told him where we were going to end up with our conclusions, and they did not want to engage.
Right. Both
The reporter didn't want to engage.
Reporter or the editor, or his editor. Yeah, both.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Inspector General performs a number of audits and investigations of third-party organizations receiving taxpayer money each year. In a recent draft executive order leaked to the press, the Trump administration called for the audit of funding to groups associated with the United Nations. One of the largest UN organizations that this subcommittee gives funding to is the World Food Program. The U.S. government has given almost $8 billion to this organization over the past 5 years. The World Program uses an external auditor that rotates amongst various nations serving 6-year terms. Currently, it is under the responsibility of the French government's auditing body. In your experience as Inspector General, have you ever performed an audit of the World Food Program or another international body?
No, and actually, in researching this question, the money that goes through CCC to the World Food Program actually is passed to USAID for delivery to the World Food Program. So it's kind of overseen by the IG's office at USAID. I would need to go back and talk to them of what oversight they have done of that piece of the program.
So USAID's maybe doing their audit?
Right.
or-
I just have to see if they've done any work on it.
Okay, that's been good to know before I ask the questions. A whole bunch of follow-up questions that really don't pertain to y'all right now. Well, that'd be great if you could get that information to me.
I mean, we have looked at the USDA side of it, which is the Food for Progress program, on several occasions, and have found weaknesses in how those programs are run as well.
Would y'all like to audit the World Program?
I'd have to look and see if we would have jurisdiction to get.
You need
over
more
that.
staff, right? All right, well, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for your time with us today and your work. Just to reemphasize a few things that my colleagues have said, certainly I think there's a great understanding that through the kind of audit and oversight facility, things that you provide, it really gives us the opportunity to understand where money is well spent, where it isn't, where programs are performing. So I just want to emphasize the concerns that my colleagues have brought up about making sure you have adequate funding and making sure you let us know when some of these things can't be performed because of that funding as we're making those critical decisions. And I want to just reemphasize again on these, the Buy America, the organic. I see two really critical roles that are performed by the USDA, which the chair mentioned earlier in his remarks. It's just critically important to farmers that we are supporting them in the markets that are available to them and have 30% potentially of the Buy America products not be procured from the United States or not, be clear. That's just a huge lost opportunity when we want to see growth in our farming sector and our agriculture sector and strengthening those markets. Same with organic, with increasing amount of imports are going on. So I just can't say enough about following that. Of course, I'm very supportive of broadband. I think I come from the most rural state in the nation, so I don't even want to tell you the low rates of broadband in many rural communities in my state and the challenges that we face not having the resources. So I think there'll be just huge bipartisan interest in that as we go forward, and we'll really look forward to the insights you can give us into that. And a more recent issue that I'm sure you haven't had time to investigate, but I just want to throw it on your radar screen. I know there was just a letter sent to the new administration about some of the issues at APHIS around scrubbing the website of animal welfare documents. You've probably read about it if you're not aware of it, but certainly that's a concern. Had 101 signatures on that letter. Very bipartisan in a time when it's not always easy to get bipartisan concerns about this, but Republicans and Democrats alike have shown concerns about the importance of the public having access to that information. And as my colleague from Connecticut was just mentioning, we shouldn't have to turn to the newspaper all the time to figure out where the problems are. And some of the ways that the public can have access to this kind of information is by being able to see it on the website. So understanding that information has been scrubbed and the importance of putting it back and this bipartisan concern about it, and the importance of just being able to continue to use sunshine as a disinfectant, as my Republican colleagues have said in their comments around this letter. I hope that you will make that one of your priorities going forward, to look into that lack of access to information. And I think in the future, any removal of useful information to consumers, to lawmakers, frankly, about what's going on. And in this case, we can see that there's just high levels of concern about animal welfare. And if you have any comments about that, I'd be interested to hear, but I just really think it fits into the theme of many things that we're talking about today, and I think a lot of us were shocked to see that information removed. Any comments? Or I doubt that you've already done the thorough investigation yet, but...
We are very much aware of the situation. As you mentioned, it's been in the news, the congressional interest. We've been watching as it unfolds. We understand it's a complex issue. The department is working with the Department of Justice. There's some litigation involved, which adds another layer of complexity. But we will be watching it. And if anyone on the committee has a particular aspect of it that you would want to bring to our attention, we would appreciate that.
Great. Well, we'll send a follow-up letter about that, and then we'd be happy to, hear back from you about ways that we could work moving forward on it, and other insights you could bring to us. So, again, thanks for your work, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Spokane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My previous committees, we usually didn't get second round, so I was trying to rush everything in the first round with 3, but I do just have one additional question. In the OIG 2017 annual plan that outlines the goals for improvement initiatives for the FSA commodity purchases for the International Food Assistance Programs, can you elaborate on some of those initiatives? We had a question from a constituent.
I can look at that. That's something that's in the plan.
Okay. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, everybody. Let me just, do you have any more, you have anything, has anybody got any, just one comment, I understand?
I just have a comment, and echoing some of the remarks of my colleague, Ms. Pingree, about transparency and information that has been taken down, whether it's this administration, the last administration, or a future administration. The more transparency, the better, whether or not you may agree with an issue or not. I think having that information out there is important, and as you said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. It's up to putting that information out there and allowing the public to see these things and make up their minds for themselves. But I think it's our obligation to make sure that we have transparency, not only within Congress, but across the board of the federal government in doing our oversight. And so thank you for bringing that up.
Let me just, in closing, Congress has the ability to ask a third-party entity review federal programs and actions to obtain objective assessment of how a process or program is being implemented. For example, in the FY 2016 Omnibus Appropriation Bill, Congress directed the National Academy of Medicine to review the process used to establish dietary guidelines for Americans and ensure the guidelines better address the health concerns facing Americans. The concern is, and we've heard from people, constituents also concerned that this review is not being conducted according to statute and report language. Would it be in the OIG's purview to review how this study is being conducted and to look into USDA's involvement with the NAOM process to ensure that the statute is being followed?
I think we would want to give some thought to that. Generally, our jurisdiction extends to any expenditure of USDA funds or any USDA activity. If there's a contract involved between a USDA agency and the National Academy, that would give us, a basis to think about work. So let's get in touch with your staff on this and get some additional information.
Okay, we'll follow up, William. But we'll be happy to try to discuss more, but get your thoughts in on the process. If you got one more question you want to ask, yeah, we'll do with that. Yeah, that'll be fine. If anybody's got any burning questions, we want to try to. Mine's very short, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Last year, I raised the issue of diversity within USDA, and not sound like a broken record, but asked for an update on OIG's overall accomplishments and related activities in the area of diversity in USDA last year and your goals for 2017, for FY17. And I recognize that you're operating under CR and a 90-day hiring freeze was just instituted, but I would like to know where we are now 1 year later on diversity.
Okay. Last year, we had an audit started to look at the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights and their operations in terms of processing complaints of discrimination. During the course of that audit, we had some investigative work that we needed to accomplish. And during the investigative work, we found answers to the objectives that our audit was looking at, and so we closed out the audit. Now, that being said, we are very much aware of what's going on within the civil rights programs at USDA. We are keeping an eye on all of the litigation in terms of Keep Siegel, BFDL, Garcia Love, to just make sure that things are rolling out and to address any concerns that might happen. If you have a specific issue you would like us to look at, we would be very happy to talk to you about that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I have been following that, but I would like to know statistically what the breakdown is of the workforce within the respective agencies and the level broken down by the demographics. You can submit that for the record, but I think it's important that we be able to monitor that progress, and hopefully there is progress.
We'll do what we can to find that information for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Move quickly. This is about the Haag HACCP-based inspection model project, HEMP program. In May 2013, you issued a report, an audit, food safety and inspection service, inspection and enforcement activities at swine slaughter plants. Your report pointed out that even though hemp pilot had been in operation for nearly 15 years, the agency had never performed an evaluation of the pilot to determine whether the pilot was achieving food safety objectives. In the last regulatory agenda published by the Obama administration, FSIS planned on publishing a proposed rule in March of this year, 2017, to expand hemp to all swine slaughter facilities. Has the OIG performed any follow-up with FSIS on the inspection program in swine slaughter facilities since 2013 Do you believe FSIS is ready to move ahead with expanding hemp to all swine slaughter facilities at this time, given that they yet determine whether expanding hemp will jeopardize food safety? Okay, but then, does that mean that this March 17, a date on a proposed rule, is that going to be held up? Well, we need to know whether or not that's going to be held up. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you all for being here, Ms. Coffey, Ms. Fong, and Mr. Harden. Thank you for your testimony here this morning. Then we've had a good hearing, some issues that I think, of course, you'll follow up with us on, and we'll follow up with you on, and look forward to working on those issues. But again, we congratulate your team and everybody over there at the Office Inspector General for all your hard work and the good work that y'all do, and your accolades that you have been awarded over the years. So again, all the best to you, and as you go through this new transition, and we look forward to being in touch. So hearing is adjourned.